Okay, so following with the series of videos that I have been making, that is every MIDI controller that you can look 2 weeks ago and every keyboard MIDI controller guide that you can look for since the last week. Today I will be making a bigger, I think it's a bigger way of having options and a criteria on how to buy an audio interface. That's all we're going to talk about for the day. This is not your this is the best. I'm going to give you criteria so you know how to choose, because honestly, pretty much all of them are good enough. It just has to suit whatever you're trying to do at this point. If it's a hobby, don't spend too much. If you're trying to go into a more professional service, then you have to invest a little bit more. Straight from Mexico City, my name is Juanchis, and let's get into it. So again, we just jump into Sweetwater, Thomann, or whatever music store we are searching for. And I just go into shop by category, studio and recording, and audio interfaces. And there's going to be so many options. And so we have a little less options. We're going to concentrate completely on audio interfaces that work for studio purposes, either for you working on your own or you working with a couple of other people. For computers, desktop or laptops, I don't care if you're on Windows or Mac. But one of the things that I would honestly like completely throw out the window at the beginning, because of how electronics have pushed us, I wouldn't go into the Thunderbolt audio interfaces because those are going out and the ports are harder to match now with USB-C. I would only concentrate on the USB audio interfaces, even though I will talk about one protocol that uses Ethernet. So USB audio interfaces. So your first question that you should make if you're going to buy a new audio interface is you should know that whenever you say is Focusrite better than Apollo or than Apogee, you have to realize that any brand has different ranges of products that aim at different categories of quality, because for them to give something at a certain price, they have to remove some other things or lower a little bit something. This doesn't mean that they are bad. This only means that for it to be cheaper, it has to come with less stuff, and I don't mean features. It has to bring some other components, some other circuitry, some other things they are sacrificing for you to have that. So for example, let's go with like this first forefront page, Focusrite. If I just go looking for audio interfaces of Focusrite, you will see that we have the entry-level range, that's the Scarlett. And if we go a little bit down, these vocasters are like, I know they are promoting them for home situations, but I wouldn't advise it if you're trying to get into some music production. Then you go into the Claret range. And if you have been doing this for long enough, you might remember these ones, the Sapphire. The Sapphire were the middle or lower mid range of Focusrite, because they used to go Scarlet, Sapphire, and Red. Now they go Scarlet into the Red line, right? This is the top range of Focusrite. And this is only one brand. For example, if you go into Audience, you will have the Evo series, then you will have the ID series. If you go into different brands, you will have different ranges. And you can just look at the prices to also realize more or less what's going on. And please remember, I'm amazed by how many people don't do this anymore. That Amazon or any online store is not the main store for everything. Developers and brands have their own websites where you can just go and look for their audio interfaces and see that they have Evo series, ID series, and Sono. You can just go into their website and see that they have an Evo series and an ID series. And Audient mainly did consoles for a long while, but now they have explored other opportunities. But please, that's the first thing you have to have in mind. Which range am I really trying to? Am I going for entry level? That's fine. Then you're dealing with this first entry range that's around $200 more or less. After that, you have to think how many things you want to record at the same time. And there's always this number that I used to say a lot to my students, that is, how long does it take you to save $100? If it takes you 3 weeks and you can get something for $100, how much would you be willing to save to get something a bit bigger, or, as I said on the previous video, something that you can grow into as your needs grow? Otherwise, if you're buying the things that are exactly like right, just fitting barely to your needs, you might run into some problems close in the close future. Like, just take that into account. If you can't afford anymore, then it's fine. Like, there's no shaming on that. But I would suggest, for example, to skip completely the one single preamp audio interfaces. For me, that doesn't make any sense. Why do you want to skip one single preamp interfaces? Is because if someone wants to go to your home and needs to record a keyboard, an actual keyboard, not a MIDI controller that the DAW is the one that's making the sound, you will need two channels, and recording it mono is going to be maybe not the best. So honestly, for me, the starting point is two preamps that could or could not have an instrument level for guitars and basses and input, but at least two inputs. How many outputs? Because that's the way most audio interfaces are branded. You can see it's 4i4, 6 1820. This one doesn't say. This one doesn't say. But for a long time, there were a lot of numbers that used to say something like 12x20 to say something. And that meant the amount of inputs available and the amount of outputs. For example, the Modu 28 by 32. That means 28 in and 32 out. Not necessarily all of those are physical. Some of them might be digital with ADAT, with SPDIF protocol, or some might even have Dante or other protocols for summing up into one single bigger audio interface. So first, ask yourself that. What's your instrument? If your instrument is vocals and guitar, two channels could be more than enough for a while, and you can start layering stuff when you're making music. I honestly think that probably the only two musicians that might need something different would be either synth or keyboard people or drummers. At least four channel in my head, because sometimes you might need two, like two keyboards or two synths, and the drummer because you at least want to record with some sort of Glyn Johns option, right? We could go into the terrain of Tascam that made and built the Model 12. That's a 12 channel console audio interface. This is an extra option that's completely on the side, and it lets you record 12 different things at the same time. And the price isn't so far away from other products, because as you increase the amount of channels available, so does the price. So just as an example, let's go with the 4x4s, right? We have Behringer, we have Universal Audio in the entry level, because these ones, the Volt, are the entry level of Universal Audio. And all of these are 4x4, and you can see it's 270, 280. This one is the cheapest, 180. Universal Audio is up at 470. And remember that we will discuss some other things that actually make these price differences suddenly shoot up so high. So let's suppose you want a Motu audio interface that's 4x4. It has channels into your computer and a way to convert digital into analog out of your computer. And you usually have different types of connectors or ways to plug in things in. These kind of connectors are called combo jacks or combo connectors, because you can plug in either an XLR cable or a plug cable straight into that part. One risk with that kind of design is that if you're not careful enough when you're plugging and unplugging stuff, you might start damaging the part because it's serving two ways of connecting stuff. Like, just be careful with your stuff. You want it to last for as many years as you can. My oldest audio interface is probably over 10 years old, and I only have two. So take care of your things because you want them to last for a long time. And here you can see that it says mic, line, and guitar. These are three different levels. I will link in the description a video from Audio University, and that probably Kyle has some video about that, so I'll link it in the description. So remember that whatever you're plugging into it, like, just has to match. If you're coming from a plug, go into a plug. If you're coming from an XLR, go into an XLR. If you're recording, for example, DJ sessions and you have a DJ mixer, not a controller, a plastic controller, no, an actual physical mixer, those 4-track usual mixers, or those scratching DJs, turntablist, 2-channel mixers that have XLR outputs, those are line level outputs, and line level is usually expected at this jack physical shape in this combo kind of connectors. So try to get some cables that come from XLR into a jack. That way you can plug that in and record it into the computer, or for streaming purposes if you're doing something like that. On the back, there's always a way to plug into your speakers or your headphones. In this case, for the speakers, you have jack outputs, like this usual jack balanced cable outputs. And I remember making cables for that. Honestly, they aren't expensive at all. Like, you just solder something like this, like this goes into the speaker, this comes out of your audio interface. It has no issue whatsoever in converting. I think there must be some speaker brand that has a jack input for balanced signal. There probably is. I don't remember one off the top of my head, but most speakers, most studio monitors come with this kind of connector. So having a couple of these in a studio will really solve a lot of situations where whatever gear you need to plug that has jack out into XLR for line level, this is a solution. And try to also solder one that's a female XLR, in case you need to go the other way around. So here, for example, you have 4 outputs available because you could have 2 pairs of speakers or a quadraphonic system in your own studio. And one interesting thing is that the product is described as 4x4, right? And I would expect either 4 microphone preamps or 4 something, but I only have 2 microphone preamps that could also be used as an instrument because there it says guitar and line. And in the back, I see that I only have 2 more line ins. So I really have 2 lines in and 2 microphones. So this wouldn't work for recording drums, for example. So you have to just pay a little bit of attention because even though Modu is a great, great brand, this probably won't work if you're looking for a 4 microphone setup, right? I would avoid as much as possible using unbalanced cables and unbalanced signals overall, because noise floor and it's just a lot of interference that you really don't need. So the ways in and out of your audio interface are determined and decided by what type of instrument are you playing, usually at your home, or what kind of needs are you trying to cover. If you're trying to make podcasts for recording on location, you probably need. There are a couple of products by Rode that do that kind of solutions, but something like this might be a better choice, because even if we check the price across these are 4x4 at almost 300, you will see that the 12 channel is 600. So again, with that number of how much you would have to save is, for every 2 channels is 250, right? And you need 6 more of those pairs, you're spending 1,500 versus 600. So that's how you usually should try and make the math of what you are actually getting. In this case, in the back, as you can see, we also have these combo jacks that can be line level, could be microphone. Here you have a small reference of the line level, line mic. And as far as I know, every single input can handle instrument, high impedance level, line, and microphone. As far as I'm concerned, as far as I know. You also have usually the phantom power for condenser microphones or active microphones that need it. So this is another way of solving the situation. Another question or another criteria is that once you have selected like what's the range you want to go into, and you know how many instruments or how many signals you want to be able to capture at the same time, you might want to think in the medium term at least, because it's hard enough. If you buy something again that's just right, it might fall short very soon. So try to look into the option of buying something that's two channels up in more options, or one range higher with less microphone inputs. Like try to figure that on your own, like that's your own question. If you have doubts, please let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to try and give you some perspective on what I think, but please give me context on what you're trying to do and what are your goals. So there's another thing that I don't think too many people pay attention to. One of those is that if you're dealing only with these entry level audio interfaces, most of them usually are only plugged and powered by USB, and those are 5 volts. And 5 volts won't give you much power. That means that your dynamic microphones, unless you're really pushing into them, won't they won't output as much voltage as they would unless you really turn up the preamp. And in recording, our whole dilemma all of the time is how can we be further away from the noise, living more or less close to the saturation point that could be interesting for some styles, and away from peaking and distorting. Like we're living always in that upper third part, trying to live there. So with an audio interface like this that's only USB powered, there will be significant sacrifices. Your speakers, they won't be able to do their job as well if they need a lot of power, because even though they are powered on their own and they have their own amps, you are not pushing so much signal into them. If you are trying to lift microphones, like lift electrically, you will probably also be a little short in some instruments that don't have a lot of SPL. On your headphones, if you have some really entry level headphones, that won't be a problem. But once we start talking about these categories, like the NDH 30s by Neumann, that have higher impedance and need a much stronger output on the headphone output itself, you will start to suffer. And that will cause distortion, probably not in the sense that you're thinking like, that's not the kind of distortion that you will listen to. But there is an impedance distortion that happens as well. And the headphones won't do it as well as they could. It's easier to have either an entry level audio interface when you really start with a little bit of a better headphones and then grow your audio interface into that, or the other way around. They won't be damaged, nothing will be broken, nothing will catch fire or anything like that. But do know that that combination of everything inside your studio does matter. Like how much output you're pushing into your speakers, how much output you're pushing into your headphones, and how do those impedances work, as well as microphones. So once you go a little bit up in the range of audio interfaces, you might go into something like this, like a 4-channel next range, low mid range, or almost medium range audio interfaces. And like let's just look at it. How many microphones can I actually plug in? Okay, it says 1 and 2, 3 and 4 combo jacks. That's important. It has an insert. This is really good for reamping. I have looked a lot into this audio interface. And the anatomy of the audio interfaces will be clearer because now we have this FX loop that, for example, if you recorded a guitar direct in and then you want to reamp it properly by taking the time to actually get the tone of the amplifier and trying new pedal combinations, like this is the way to go. Or maybe someone recorded at their own place with a a little bit less of quality in the preamp and you want to reamp it through some preamps that you have at line level, you can do it. And this audio interface specifically does consider the level to go out and to go in again. So this is a great option. On the other hand, for example, the Focusrite Claret, if we look at the back, we have 4 line inputs and 4 different inputs up front, right? We have this instrument microphone, these two, and we have these other microphones with their own phantom power. But in the back, we have other entries available. But for example, in the Claret, what we have is these 4 ways into it with the 4 preamps up front. So again, you have 2 instrument level inputs that if I look it up here, there's no actual signal of that. But if I look up front, those are marked here. They are different connectors, right? Why? Because probably circuit-wise, it makes sense for the design. Here you have everything again in the same combo jack connector. In the outputs, we have 4 line outputs, again for your speakers. And another interesting thing to watch here is that this one has 2 headphones and this one has 2 headphones as well. So that usually inside your DAW will give you the possibility to make 2 different mixes for the 2 outputs of headphones. And maybe if you're recording with headphones, it might be better for someone to listen a little bit better to themselves and the other one to the other self, if that makes any sense. So we're starting to get into the terrain of audio interfaces that lets you try and get a little bit more creative in the routing world. I have a video on how to use your audio interface for creative routing if you're in studio situations. I'll link it in the description. Go check it out. And another part appears in this range of audio interfaces. As you can see, we have this WordClock connection that I don't see in this Claret one. This WordClock is really important if you're trying to grow into a bigger studio or grow into something more stable. When you're trying to sync up different audio interfaces to record with different audio interfaces at the same time, you will need something that's called a word clock that simply makes the function of a clock. Like it's just counting and counting and counting, and everyone else connected to this device is following that time, and that's how we avoid jitter in the digital realm because it's not the super precise clock and not every audio interface will be running at the same time. We could make videos on that because that's going to be even a deeper subject. But as you can see, this Claret doesn't have one. I remember that the 8 channel does have a word clock, but the Audient has it even in the 4 preamp range. That's interesting, just as a design, because this one could also be your main clock and you could send clock into another audio interface. Why? Because you can sum preamps as you keep on buying audio interfaces if you need something more for a live session. So let's suppose that you bought this one first as your main audio interface and this is your first audio interface. Fantastic, I love it. Through these connections right here that are the opticals in and out that are called ADAT, what you would have to get is some sort of cable like this that's really, really different, and I will show it also on the screen on the store, is that this one connects straight into the optical and goes out of one audio interface into another. And this has a limit of how many channels can it carry over one single cable. So just take that into account because that's why usually most of these have 2 ins and 2 outs, because then you can carry all of your channels into other audio interfaces, or it can receive a lot more. For example, this Claret, it's much more thought as a central unit instead of someone that's going to follow or someone that it's going to empty whatever is going into it into another thing, except unless you're using this SPDIF connection that this one doesn't have. Pretty much these two are the same, like quality-wise, they are the same. There's no losses, it's digital. But this is a much more common way of connecting through audio interfaces. This way, you could have even one long optical cable running into the other room, and you could send all of the monitoring through that, and or receive all of the recording through this same cable, only into your desk, without having to have a huge snake laying around your studio. And that works really, really well. And a little bit further to the left, you will see that these two now actually have this DC connection. This gives me the best trust that I could ever need in any gear of audio, professional audio. If it's actually plugged to the wall in any way, that can probably lift a little bit more than anything that's only USB. So as you can see, buying some optical cable, ADAT cable, is really cheap and they are long enough. So this thing can run for a lot of meters and I won't lose a single thing. This also lets me have my preamps closer to the microphone because that's always good. Any meters you lose from your microphone to your preamp are always really important. So have them as close as possible and maybe sum it up with something like this closer to your desk. That's also an option. And as you can see, here we have these different options of having two ways in and two ways out. As far as I remember, you can send 8 tracks, 8 channels through here, because that's the limit of the ADAT format. If you upsample, it starts halving. So if you go up to 96, you will only have 4 and so on. But for 44.1 and 48, you will be able to handle 8 tracks and 8 channels at the same time through the ADAT connection. And at the very, very left, we have this thing that really excites me because that's something that makes me actually trust the gear that I'm using. And I know that it's going to give everything on its power to give me what I need. And that's DC connection. It's going to be plugged to a wall, and that's going to give me a better preamp, handling and level. And if I want to push my speakers, I will be able to push my speakers. If I have expensive headphones, I will be able to lift my expensive headphones because that's why I bought them. And one last thing in this idea of this same range is having this MIDI connection, MIDI in and MIDI out. As you can see, the one up top doesn't have it. They are both in the same range and they have even different ways of thinking of the product itself and the needs of your studio. And that's what you have to think about before buying it. So you have a certain criteria of which things more or less comply with it. And then from there, you can start adding a couple of other things. But having this MIDI in and MIDI out will let you synchronize synthesizers. It could let you run into a daisy chain for drum machines or some sort of external setup. Or maybe if you're doing some sort of live entertainment and you need to send MIDI as some sort of synchronization with a MIDI clock, you can do it over that protocol. Because remember that many keyboards also have MIDI ins and MIDI outs. And if you're running out of USB ports, you can use that MIDI in to send that MIDI from the keyboard into your computer. If you have a really old keyboard that doesn't have a USB connection for you to plug it into your DAW, but it has a MIDI out, you can use that MIDI out into your MIDI in from your interface and add that for your DAW. Like that's completely fantastic. That's a great solution because that's something that most people never use. We still have MIDI and it's really, really useful. Take advantage of it. I'm going to give a small rundown, but there are a couple of things that I still want to mention. So, first, you need to make your checklist. Please make your checklist. You need to know what's your budget. Like, how much are you willing to spend, and what are you trying right now as someone that's being a hobbyist or trying to provide a service for other people or trying to build a career on your own as a musician, right? If you're on the later two, then you need probably something not entry level, probably not USB powered, in my opinion. It's only my opinion because I feel like those entry level fall short so fast when you're trying to really listen to differences. And most of the decisions we're trying to make since a lot of people are trying to get into music production through mixing, you need to be able to listen and to trust the whole chain. So I would move into this range of audio interfaces. But even if you don't move into this range of audio interfaces, I would pay a lot of attention to have at least two headphone outputs, because you might want to hang with somebody and listen at the same time. If you don't have speakers, you need two headphones. If you have speakers, then you can plug them straight into the line outputs, and that's fine. But remember that thinking creatively, engineering wise, lets you take advantage of these four line outputs, and this could let you have four mono different mixes for headphones as well. So that's something to consider, because it's only taking advantage of whatever resources you have with whatever you bought. You have to think, how many microphones or signals are you going to probably record in the next 3 to 5 years at the same time? So again, if you're some sort of home keyboard player, synth player, drum machine, you will probably need more than two preamps. I would completely avoid one single preamp. I would jump straight into the four preamp realm and just be really sure that they are four lines or four microphones, or what do those four inputs really offer. Then, if you're in that synthy domain, you might want to have this MIDI in or MIDI out, so you can do other tricks for program changes, size X or size X messages, or any other kind of MIDI workflow that could be useful for synchronizing stuff instead of just relying on your USB ports. Another thing is that if you're thinking of this unit, of this audio interface, as some way of amplifying and then emptying those into another future audio interface that's better, then you need some sort of ADAT out or some digital out that will match the one audio interface that you're aiming for. Most top level or most expensive audio interfaces have this type of connection available. So this could be a problem, but you have to check compatibility with the model that you're looking for. This for me just feels safe. That's why I would go for the ADAT one. That's the only thing I would go for. And then if you're trying to think if it's a gear, a piece of equipment, a piece of hardware that the brand itself thinks of how it's going to integrate with higher tier equipment in your studio, it will probably have this WordClock output or input or both. In this case, this one is thought more as the central brain and to clock everything around it instead of following someone else. For example, the 8-channel version of this one, as you can see, has SPDF in out, MIDI in, MIDI out, WordClock out as well only, but it has the optical in and optical out options. So just think about it. Like, it doesn't have to be a game breaker. It doesn't have to ruin the buy for you or ruin the product for you. If it fits your needs, then give it a try. For example, this 8-channel preamp now gives you 10 line output. So maybe we are thinking of building into Atmos or building into multi-channel, you will need this amount of outputs, that this one only has 4. So maybe you will be better with a couple of 2 audio interfaces that give you 2 times 10 outputs, or find a way to sum up all the way to that number. But for example, whenever I'm working in the studio and probably the musician could be in another place, or they have their headphones on because you are more or less in the same room, but you are far enough from each other, you might want to have some sort of talkback. And for a talkback, you would be wasting one input in here in the back, but this one has a talkback built in. And that's the button right there. So talkback could also be one criteria to add. Another thing was that Universal Audio for a while was using its own interfaces as DSP, external digital signal processing, and that would relieve a lot the processing on your computer, but it practically worked as some sort of lock for you to be able to use their plugins. Now they have the Spark model where everyone can use them, and you still had to print them real time instead of just using it as a plugin and offline render. One extra thing that could be useful if you want to really pay attention is that most mid to lower mid range interfaces might have this dim button, because for listening you need two levels mainly, like only two amounts of volume available, cut for muting, and some of them have this mono button built in as well, or you can do it digitally. But if you have it like just to click or to push on top of your desk, that's also great. I hope this rundown is useful. If you want to support more or less these kind of videos and something that I'm willing to give, because I think this is a way of presenting the topics that isn't so common on YouTube as far as I have seen, there's a link in the description for Buy Me a Coffee, because I like coffee as well. And you can support my work that way. You could also hit the like button, comment, subscribe, share, and hit the notification bell so you know when I release a video every single week. The last audio interface that I wanted to mention that uses a very different protocol than the rest, because it is, but it's not completely USB analog in that sense, is this range of Focusrite. That's the red range, let's call it that. This is a 2 preamp. This is my main monitor in my studio. This is not a sponsored video. I just really like the way it sounds. It has helped me so much understand a couple of things. It's only a 2 preamp audio interface. It's expensive for a 2-channel audio interface. But the beautiful thing of this is that you can see here in the back that it has these Cat5 cables, power over Ethernet sign underneath. And what that lets you do is it lets you connect to a Dante protocol. It uses its own sound card. It's the Dante virtual sound card. And then you have this huge routing matrix that you can see everyone that's connected to the same network. And using something like this, you could even go into live audio and provide a recording service using only Dante. You don't need to have all of the preamps, because usually live consoles have preamps. But if one of those live consoles has a Dante output, you could feed the stream of those preamps of that console into your computer and record multitrack, because this gives you a lot of channels available. It doesn't have even it's not even close to the limits of ADAT. So take that into account. The 8-channel preamps with this Dante protocol are expensive. Now you see how expensive they are, right? This one is the one that I have. This one doesn't have preamps, is only for monitoring, so that could be useful. And this also works really well for classroom purposes or for monitoring in different parts of the room of a building if you're building a multi-facility, multi-room studio. And the last criteria that you might want to check into before buying your audio interface is look if it has anything software bundled related whenever you make the purchase. Because many companies by now usually have partnered with different brands, so they offer you either a plugin, some sort of discount on some other services. Like, just take that into account and put that all together. And now, honestly, the one that looks nicer to you, that's the one. If you're in the same range, more or less price range, I really doubt there's going to be a horrible quality difference. To be honest, I really doubt it. Once you start getting into higher level equipment, you realize that it's just bluer, greener, yellower, but everything sounds well, sounds really well. We're living in a golden age where we can have these things with great technology, with great sounding technology in our home studios for not so many dollars, even though the audio economy is complex. But honestly, everything sounds just fine by now. Pick whatever suits your needs and whatever brand you feel related to, whatever colors match what you're doing, go with that. Please, please use this checklist that I just gave you. It will save you so many questions and so much time. Do you need how many microphones? Do you need MIDI? Do you need to grow into something else using WordClock? Do you need to sum more channels into or out from it with ADAT? How many headphone outputs do you need? How many speaker outputs do you need? Because those are independent channels. Are you trying to build a multi-channel system, like a 4, 5, 6, 10, 15 channel? Think of those things for the next 3 to 5 years, because whatever you buy, it has to last for at least 10 years. Don't waste your time with micro purchases, because they will only set you back in everything. If you like this kind of videos, be sure to comment, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I know I already said it, but straight from Mexico City, my name is Juanchis, and thanks for listening.